Susan Kempinen, and I'm in charge of activities and volunteers here at the Merowith Center. And it is my great pleasure to introduce author, speaker, life coach, and my friend, Jill Farmer. Jill is the author of There's Not Enough Time and Other Lies We Tell Ourselves, which debuted as a bestseller on Amazon. Jill has been interviewed by everyone from the Washington Post to Inc. and Fitness Magazine. Jill travels the U.S. delivering keynotes and teaching her acclaimed programs to top corporations and organizations. She was an Emmy award-winning teacher journalist who is now a master certified time and stress management coach. And that is quite a resume, Jill. We are going to have Judy mute everybody so that there's no distractions while Jill talks to us today. And without further ado, here is
Thanks so much, Susan. How's everybody doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm so glad to be with you today and so glad to be talking about this subject matter. It's near and dear to my heart always to talk about time and stress management, but I think it's particularly important and interesting for us to talk about this in these unprecedented times that we've been in. So I'm going to start with a little story. Once upon a time, there was a poor young girl. She dreamed of being a member of the royal family one day. It happened, and then she lived happily ever after. The end. Is that not a very interesting story, is it? Right? Because what's it missing? Plot twists, right? Plot twists are, it turns out in our world, plot twists are really important to make stories interesting, to make things that we want to see and that we want to learn more about happen. In not only in stories or in literature or in books that we're reading, do we want plot twists? Plot twists actually make our lives interesting as well. The problem with plot twists is they often come with the side disadvantage of being challenging and hard. And so what we're going to talk about during our time together is how we can navigate and deal with this massive plot twist that all of us have been living for the last almost 10 months of our life in ways that allow us to move through the plot twist, to have it be a hero's journey of a thread of a story that we move from point A to point B and not be something that leaves us feeling stuck in place. So with that, I want to share with you some of the things. I did a little survey of some of the folks who are going to be here today to ask them to tell me some of the challenges that they were experiencing during this time of our COVID challenges. And many of you reported feelings of that I talked to, so that they were experiencing feelings of isolation, missing that human to human contact and human to human conversations that we all love. Some of you also talked about, Susan, give me a thumbs up. I just want to make sure you guys can see this. My screen, is it sharing? Okay, good. Some of you also said that you've noticed one of the things that's not so great, that's challenging about this is a sense of lower productivity. We're going to talk about productivity a little bit later. I don't think of it normally as, I don't define it the way that a lot of people define productivity. But a lot of you have noticed that with so much happening in the world, that distractions of kind of what's happening out in the world have kept you from being able to focus on things that you value, that matter to you, that you want to get to and get done. Some of you talked to me about motivation issues. When we don't have those normal, maybe appointments in our day, the normal routines that we were used to having, it can kind of be like the banks of the river get taken away. We feel a little bit flooded. We don't have that direction for our focus and our flow. And it's sometimes the more open blocks of time can leave us with motivation issues. Family challenges came up for a lot of people. And of course, we have a multi-generational group here. So for those of you who have small children at home that you've been managing their learning, you've had more time than you expected or probably wanted with family members. For those of you on the other end of the age spectrum, because of safety and travel concerns, you may have not, or trying to honor the guidelines of social distancing, et cetera, sheltering in place, you haven't had a chance to spend nearly as much time as you'd like with loved ones and those you care about. And for those of you who do have kids at home, not only are you managing them, but often their education right now as well, which can be a really big challenge. So the other thing that can be really challenging about this is none of us really know how long it's going to go on. And psychologists have called this, and I keep referring to it as a kind of like an app that's running in the background of our phone. And for those of you that have a smartphone, you know that sometimes your battery will be draining really fast, and maybe somebody will say, oh, mom, dad, one of your kids or grandkids will say, well, that's because you have this app running on the phone and it's draining the battery from your phone. And we say, oh, I want to take that app off, or I want to make that app inactive so it's not draining my battery. But COVID-19 is kind of like an app running in our phones that none of us, unfortunately, have the ability or capability to take off of our phones. And so or to take off of our lives. And that's what's draining our batteries. There's something called virus fatigue that has been real for, I know, a lot of us throughout this whole experience. Now, interestingly, when I asked this question to some of you who are here today, you had just about as easy of a time answering this question as you did when I asked you what the challenges that you were facing. And this question was, what are benefits that you've noticed that have come up during this COVID-19 time? Some of you named new skills. For instance, lots of us have gotten at least somewhat good at figuring out how to sign on to a Zoom meeting and connect to each other, or maybe FaceTime kids or loved ones in other places. Some of you have had things that you like doing that you've really given more focus or attention to. My mom's always been an artist, but she's been doing these beautiful, more detailed watercolor paintings of hummingbirds. She's sent out dozens all over the country because she's had time to sort of hone her attention on those new skills. Some of you have really liked the fact that you didn't have as tight as schedules for meetings or things that you had to run kids to or grandkids to or expectations, and that freedom in your schedule has given you more agency over your time and priorities. I know in our own household, we have been able to make it to some neighborhood meetings because they've been been online, and we hadn't been able to get to those before because they were at times that conflicted with our work. Some people are experiencing more connection because people who lived far away, they didn't have a way to keep in contact with them. And now that we've learned about things like Zoom and FaceTime, we're having video conversations with people we care about. And then some of you find the challenge of lower productivity. Some of you are saying, no, I have higher productivity. I've dug into projects that I'd been procrastinating, cleaning out closets. Somebody said they sold an old car that they'd been meaning to get rid of for a long time. And family photos getting organized and tackled. So the things to notice is that some things that are challenges for one person are benefits for the other. So there's no real total universal experience about COVID-19 that everyone is experiencing. And most of us could probably identify with things on the challenge sheet and on the benefits sheet, because most of us are experiencing some really interesting, both hard things and good things that have come from this. And so I think that's the thing for us to kind of put into perspective here. We all have this natural tendency in our brains, something called the normalcy bias, that tells us that we want things to stay the same way they've always been. We want them to go back to normal. And that's typical for all of us in these situations, at least initially, to be like, I just can't wait till I can blank. I want to go back to whatever that former thing used to be that we wanted to have. And while that normalcy bias is completely, again, normal, it also allows us to remember that sometimes in that rush to return to normal, we could instead use this time to think about what part of normal do we want to return to? What parts of the way things used to be do we cherish and want to make sure that we can help recreate? And what parts of the way things used to be were not so great, that didn't serve us? And this disruption, this plot twist has given us a new lens to look at things in a slightly different way, to allow us to consider new ideas and new perspectives. And the other thing that's important to know is, although our brains have this normalcy bias that wants to take us back into sometimes the patterns of the way things have always been or the way things used to be, we also have this other incredibly more powerful part of our brains that allow us, called neuroplasticity, which allow our brains to adapt and be flexible in changing circumstances when needed. And our brains actually grow when we have opportunities. When plot twists show up, it turns out it's good for our brains. It's not always good for our attitudes. It's not always good for that part of us that just wants things to stay normal and go back to the way that they've always been. But it is good for us long term in terms of our ability to adapt, change, and be flexible. So the next thing we're going to talk about is I'm going to share 3 easy tools for helping you tap into that part of your brain's superpower. It's literally wired to be adaptable and flexible, and to help you move through that plot twist when you get stuck. Now, at the bottom of your Zoom screens, kind of halfway in the middle, it looks like if you kind of take your cursor and run your finger over it, there's what looks like a cartoon box that says chat. If you guys click on that, you'll see a white box that comes up on the right side of your screen, and you can type questions to me. Judy, my producer for today's meeting, and I will keep track of your questions. And as we go throughout the presentation, I'm happy to answer questions that you type into there, so that if there's something I say that you want to get more clarification on, or you want to say yes, or are you crazy, you're so wrong, all welcome. But please feel free to share that in that chat feature. If you haven't used that before, it's a pretty easy way for us to stay in communication with each other. Okay, so let's dive in here. This is a good time to get a pencil and a piece of paper if you got one around, because these ideas are things that you can use over and over again after we're done today. We're going to talk about proven, these are all based in brain science and in practicality. I use these with myself and with my clients. Proven ways for us to help us move through those stuck places when we feel like we're in the middle of this big plot twist. So again, we don't want the plot twist to be the end of the story. We're not creating a tragedy here, right? We're creating a hero's journey of moving through challenging things. One of the most important things that we can do in order to move out of stuck places or challenging places during these times is to do what I call acknowledge. You're like, okay, I know that word, but I don't know what you mean here. Acknowledge means actually slowing down, pausing, and saying to yourself, I am feeling X. This is hard. A lot of times what happens when we're not really paying attention to what is happening for us, what emotions are coming up, is one of 2 things. Either we kind of shove it down, try to pretend nothing is going on, we're not really going to deal with it, and then it comes out sideways in ways that aren't so great for us, for our health, and for our mental interactions with other people. Or instead of processing our feelings, instead of kind of being adults and moving through our feelings, we get triggered, and then we project our feelings or have our feelings at other people, which tends to create conflict, discord, all kinds of things that don't really help us move forward. So all feelings have a right to life. This is not about, pretending you don't have feelings, or, trying to have only positive thoughts instead of having feelings. We all need to, as healthy human beings, have emotions and process the emotions. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about that. A client of mine reached out to me, and she was an executive coaching client, and she said, "Oh, I'm so angry. I got this terrible email from my boss," and it was a really unkind email. And it was kind of an attack out of nowhere. And she said, "I'm quitting. I've had it." And I said, "That is perfectly your choice. My job is not to try to talk you in and out of whether you should keep a job or not keep a job. I will tell you, you have reflected to me many times that this is meaningful work for you, and you generally have a pretty good relationship with this person. So rather than making a decision right now, when you are activated emotionally, let's process that emotion for a day or two, and then you can make whatever decision you want to make. She said, okay. And then she said, wait a second, I don't think I know how to do that. And I said, yeah, a lot of us are really not so good at processing our emotions. So I recommended some things that I recommend to a lot of different clients, and a lot of therapists will recommend to their clients. One is go out, take a walk, exert yourself. If you can't take a walk, do some stretches, get your blood pumping a little bit, because we know when we let our body exert itself a little bit, it can metabolize excess emotion that we have, especially things like anger and frustration. Exercise is a really, really good technique. We'll talk more about that later. Sometimes you can just take a towel when nobody's around and beat it against a wall, a way that you have to express or exert the emotion without taking it out at somebody else, either verbally or online or however else that might come out sideways. Talking to a trusted thinking partner. Now, this isn't calling your friend who tends to be good at putting fuel on the fire and making a situation that you don't feel so great about feel even more enormous. This is the time to call the friend or family member or connect with them who's calm, who can listen, who can hold space for you to have your feelings, and so that you can express them and process them without having you spin out in them. So I gave those ideas to this coaching client. She reached out to me a couple days later and said, okay, I don't want to quit. I just want to have a really possibly hard conversation with my boss about how that kind of communication really did not work for me. She reached out to her boss, and you know what happened? Immediately, he apologized. He was embarrassed. He felt guilty. He had had a triggering situation involving something that had nothing to do with my client. And instead of processing his emotion, he had misdirected, projected his unprocessed frustration and anger at another situation at her. And the consequence of that was he almost lost a really good employee. So going back to this step, acknowledging what you're feeling, and then taking responsibility for processing your emotion and naming it so that you're not doing it at somebody else or at a situation or at wailing and gnashing our teeth at the world is really effective. Another step, number 2, is accept. What do I mean by that? Accepting has to do with recognizing what is within our control and what is not within our control, and accepting what we can change and accepting what we can't change. One of my favorite writers is known to say, arguing with reality is a losing proposition, but only 100% of the time. So what do I mean by arguing with reality? You know, when we're kids, we watch little kids argue with reality all the time, right? It's called a tantrum. So if I'm a little kid and I want to go to the amusement park and I'm really excited to go, and then I get there and it's thundering and lightning and storming and they close the park, I'm going to have a tantrum and I'm going to stomp my feet and I'm going to say, Mom, Dad, make it stop raining, make it stop thundering so I can be here and enjoy my time. And of course, nobody can make it stop raining, right? And the adult knows no amount of stomping feet and getting mad and losing temper and losing control is going to make anything different, right? Because that's out of control. Yet, interestingly, as adults, sometimes we forget that, and we can get not very good about remembering how to stay in what's in our control and what's out of our control. So one of my favorite ways to play with this, and some of you may have done this someday with a therapist or a coach, is I take a piece of paper. As you can tell, I have very good artistic talent that I wanted to share with you today. I took a piece of paper and I draw a circle, or at least a facsimile thereof of a circle in the middle of it. And I have clients do this all the time. And the exercise that we do is inside the circle. That's where you write down the things that are bothering you, that you're worried about, that you're frustrated about, that you have some degree of control over. that you have some way that you can impact the outcome of it. There's something you can do that could make it better, that could improve it, that could change it. And then outside the circle, you write the things that you're worried about, frustrated about, that you're spending time thinking about, that are out of your control. And 100% of the time, when I do this exercise with people, they come to me and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much of my time and energy and focus and worry is being spent on things that are on the outside of the circle. And what would happen if I would spend more time focusing on the things that I can have some impact on, that are within my, as I would call it, sphere of influence, to make a change, to do something about. And I think it's just, it can be really tempting in the world to just sort of, again, we wail and gnash our teeth, but when we think about that as tantruming, it helps us to recognize that as mature adults, we have a choice to make there, and we can choose where our focus goes more often than sometimes we remember. We have that choice. So that's what I mean by when I say that step number 2 of accepting. It's noticing what's within your sphere of influence and what's not. And then the last step for these ideas or ways to more easily move through plot twists that show up is to reframe our thinking. And this is something that you hear a lot about people talk about it in self-help and in psychology. And it's like, okay, yeah, I want to reframe my thinking. But then it's like, I don't exactly know how to do that. So I need some help understanding how to reframe my thinking. So here's how I have, here's some ideas that I use all the time in my life. I have suggested it in my children's and families' lives for challenging situations. When we're saying reframing, what I mean by this is looking at the same problem from a different perspective. Looking at a problem where we're feeling stuck and being willing to look at it through a different perspective, which allows us the potential to move through the problem. So it's obviously a really helpful thing to do when we're trying to cultivate those skills of being good at adapting and resiliency, which are super good skills to have during these COVID times. So here's one of the most effective ways I can reframe a situation. Next time you're feeling really, really, really stuck, I want you to imagine somebody who you respect and love and that you identify as really successful. It can be somebody you know in your real life. It can be a literary character. It can be somebody that's very famous that you've always just really loved the way that they show up in the world. You get to choose. But somebody who you really think makes excellent choices in a variety of different situations. And you're going to imagine that they are stepping into your life and into your brain, into your body, and they are experiencing the same problem that you are having in this moment. In doing that, you might begin to understand. You say, oh, I think they would think this in this situation. I think they might say this. I think they might have this perspective. It can be really refreshing for us when we're in that stuck place to imagine how somebody else that we really like would consider that. Another effective way that we can reframe situations or shift our perspectives when we're in a challenging or stuck place is something that I call the tens, and you may have heard versions of this or read about it in different ways, but it's simply kind of changing our lens or our perspective on a situation. And we ask ourselves, okay, is this thing where I'm stuck and swirling and kind of up in a bunch right now, is this going to matter in 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, 10 years, right? So it's like we're real close up. Is this going to matter in 10 minutes? Heck yes, it is, because I'm really ticked. 10 hours? I don't know. 10 days? Probably not. 10 years? No, not worth the amount of effort that my brain is giving it in internal dialogue right now. It can be a really helpful solution. The other thing that another way that we can really help ourselves reframe or give different perspectives on situations is by choosing helpful thoughts. Because when we have helpful thoughts, they're more likely to serve us. They're higher quality thoughts, which are just more likely to deliver higher quality results. And so I'm going to tell you a story about that too, that I had with a client not too long ago. So we'll change the identifying details. I can share if I change the identifying details. Somebody I'll call Jim reached out to me. He was so frustrated about his child's learning environment before the school year started this year. And he said, "Oh, the school just doesn't know what it's doing. I'm so frustrated. The school doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't know what it's doing." And he repeated that over the course of the first 2 or 3 minutes that we were talking with each other, over and over and over again. And I said, "Okay, I understand that the thought, the school doesn't know what it's doing, is feeling really intense to you. Is that a helpful thought?" And he said, "No, but it's true." I said, "Yep, you're right." Often thoughts that we're having, thoughts like this that we're having that are true but unhelpful, leave us stuck. So I invited him to say, how can we work together maybe to think about some thoughts that might serve you better in this situation? So he thought about it for a second. At first he said, okay, here's what needs to happen. I guess they're doing the best they can do. And I said, "Okay, is that helpful?" And he said, "Not really." And then he paused. I could see it click in his brain. And he looked into the Zoom lens. We were talking via Zoom. And he said, "Oh, I got it. What I really want is for Katie," that's who we'll call his daughter, "Katie to get something out of this semester in this chaos and all this. I want her to get something out of this that she remembers. I want her to move forward in her learning." And as soon as he said that, that thought created a more meaningful intention of what he wanted to do. And immediately he's like, "Okay," we started brainstorming. And I'm not kidding, 5 minutes, he and I had come up with a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D for ways to help as a family, a unit, and as parents, they could support Katie's educational environment, regardless of whether the school's decision-making process sort of felt chaotic or uncertain during that time. So reframing the thought from, they don't know what they're doing, to what do I really want to see in this situation, shifted things to a much more meaningful place to take action and to feel empowered in that situation. So that's why I really like to see us be able to reframe our thinking in ways that take us to helpful thoughts instead of unhelpful thoughts. Okay, so Judy, I'm going to do a quick check-in with you. We have a lot more ideas and some stories. We're going to talk about stress management coming up, and some productivity and time management tools coming up as well. But have any other questions come in that I haven't seen or that you've heard? Nope. Okay, Judy, you're muted, but okay. So Susan's saying we're good. Okay, so don't hesitate.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, well, I hope it's because they're just getting so much good information, but don't hesitate to ask any if you have any. Okay, now, even when we are doing a better job of moving through plot twists, as we talked about earlier, the nature of this experience can be stressful. And so I think a lot of us have had experienced stress. And a lot of us are not so great at managing our stress and dealing with stress. It can be really, really hard. So the next two things that we're going to be talking about here involve how we can do a better job of managing stress that's triggered by this current situation. Okay. A lot of us are used to focusing on stressors. Oh, I wish if only the virus would go away, if only this official would make this different decision, if only this person was elected or not elected. We focus on the stressors, but the stressors are often out of our control, right? Back to that circle exercise. When we're in an activated state of stress, when we're feeling stress on the inside, it's a lot more helpful for us to be able to think about ways that we manage our stress. And so here are, because we know long term, some people used to think, oh, it's good when I get a little stressed out, that's how I get stuff done. Now we know so much from science about how bad stress is for our bodies. There's new research just in the last 5 years that shows us that when we're in an activated stress state, we can lose up to 13 IQ points. It makes us stupider when we're stressed out. And I don't know about you guys, I don't have any IQ points to just be giving away willy-nilly because I'm stressed. So I've worked hard to learn how to manage my stress better so I don't get stupider or sicker, which I think is, we lose the ability to prioritize. There's a neurobiologist by the name of Rick Hansen, who's just a really interesting and smart dude. And I like the way he kind of he gives it to this. He calls the stress brain the red brain, and the green brain kind of our ideal brain for getting stuff done. We know that when we're in stress brain, that's when we're reacted, we're aggressive, frustrated, irritated, we're focused on inadequacy. And it's that in that red brain mode, that's where we have kind of those serious costs to our health and our brain capacity. Whereas when we're in that green brain mode, we make much better decisions. Our whole prefrontal cortex is employed when it helps us. And then here's even new research that's come out. It's very recent, that when we're in green brain, we also can be we also can be more patient. And it turns out, research shows us that when we're more patient, we have longer telomeres, which means we live longer. So if you are an impatient person, let's work on getting in that green brain mode where we can get a little more patient, because it's going to help you live longer. Okay, so you're saying, okay, Jill, I get stressed a lot. What am I supposed to do about it? There's some very easy science-based ways we know that we can get more in that green brain mode, exercise more patience, lengthen our telomeres, live longer, and just experience more peace. And one of the most effective ways we can do that is by completing the stress cycle, as some therapists call it, which is simply processing your stress so you don't stay stuck in stress. Exercise, I wish I had a little bit of a sexier answer for you here, but exercise is the number one way. The research shows us over and over and over again, when we even just something mild like a 7-minute to fitness app on your phone, or stretching, or taking a short walk, any way that you can move your body in any way that it's capable, we know that that's one of the most effective ways that your body can metabolize stress hormones for you. So your body metabolizing stress hormones is going to be extremely effective. Your brain can help metabolize and process stress when you learn to quiet it down a little bit. I have I have a little bit of functional ADD. And so I always resisted greatly when people would talk about meditation or mindfulness. I was like, no, thanks. My mind's going too much. I don't want to sit and have that happen. But what I've learned, and why I decided to give it a shot, is because when we exercise our brain's ability to be present, which is all mindfulness is, it's not really we don't have to go to an ashram somewhere. It's just the ability to be present. We strengthen our brain's ability to stop projecting forward or catastrophizing about future events that haven't happened, which raises our stress level. And we also strengthen our brain's ability to stop ruminating backwards about things that have already passed that we can no longer control. So mindfulness is just how we sort of get into the present moment. And again, I'm not trying to tell everybody you need to go spend years learning how to meditate, but there's apps out there, there's short YouTube videos. That's a lot of times with my clients, we'll teach them just to gently, not grab, but gently hug one wrist with your other hand and slow your breathing. That's a way that we know we can soothe our nervous system and quiet down. Putting your hands on your chest and slowing your breathing. Setting a timer for a minute in the morning and in the evening and counting your breaths. Those are ways that meditation and mindfulness stuff in our brain gets activated even without, learning a whole new skill. And then one of the last ways that we know that it's good for us to process stress is to do what we can't do right now, which is put our hands together and hang out with our friends. So community is important. And right now, more than ever, since we can't be together, it's not a good idea for us to be, giving each other, putting our hands together in the circle, we need to look for ways like this to get together, to learn from each other, to share with each other, to phone calls, FaceTime with friends and family, because it really does help us to process the stress, to get outside of ourselves. So over here in the chat, Helen, we got time management tools coming up in just a minute. And hi, Steve. I love that he shares, if you check out on the chat, about a nonprofit that his daughter has that teaches empathy, respect, and understanding. And empathy is one of my favorite essential skills to help people cultivate, because sympathy is a way that we look at other people and we kind of feel sorry for them or we pity them, which isn't very helpful. Empathy is how we put ourselves in other people's shoes and look at them through the lens. And so I think, I'm guessing that listening to that reframing and perspective shifting reminded you of that. And Norm, a great question about, given our current reality, should we set up a new routine that would be helpful? I think yes. And I'm going to talk about that right now in our time in our time management skills section. So when people talk about time management, they say, oh yeah, I need help with my time management because I'm so busy. I'm just so busy. I'm so busy. And what I think we need help with our time management a lot of times, whether we're busy or not busy. And I, for one, find busy completely overrated, because busy by its very definition means occupied. I mean, none of us want to, a lot of us get a lot of worth by telling people, oh yeah, I'm busy. I'm so busy. Busy is how we measure whether we're, doing enough. But busy is occupied. I don't think any of us wants to die someday and have on our gravestone, well, I was busy, I was occupied, right? What we want is to be productive. And I don't mean productive like back when you used to work, for those of you who no longer work, or even those that you do, productive like, producing more piles of stuff for the machine at work. To me, productivity is producing what matters to you. Productivity is helping to create and cultivate the experience that you want to get out of life. And so when I talk about people about the routines of where you are in life, and with COVID being in this time and situation where we no longer have those same routines that we were used to, I like to have us think about setting up and using some new tools, perhaps, so that we can do a better job of curating and cultivating the experience we want to have out of this one life we have to live. So whether that's producing or creating connections, or a different space that you're living in, or a new skill, or just playing with an old skill. All those things I think are meaningful, and all of them require a little bit of advanced planning, which is just a fancy way of saying we got to think about it a little bit, map it out in order for us to a lot of times get that stuff done. Okay. So a lot of us use fixed deadlines for deciding what's next. Here's what's on the calendar. Here's what emails come in. Here's what, text has come. I like to invite people once a week. On Friday afternoon, I usually do mine for the coming week. Other people do it on Sundays. Maybe you do it Monday, to sit down and to map out what you want to have or experience or feel in the coming week, right? That's, I find, an incredibly effective roadmap for making your week matter. If we don't do that, then a lot of us default to something called the low-hanging fruit theory of how we get stuff done. And the low-hanging fruit just means what do I see here, and I just do that, as opposed to getting to the stuff that matters to us a little bit more, the stuff that sometimes might be a little more challenging, but that we're going to be really glad that we moved through and accomplished and achieved and can say we got done. I tell the story a lot of times if I'm with a corporate group, if we're not careful, that low-hanging fruit can have a big cost to us. Imagine we're all apple farmers, like the world's best apple farmers. And it's harvest time, and the apples are at their peak and just ready to be picked at high top dollar price. And the apples that have fallen onto the ground that are starting to rot, we can still get about 10 cents on the dollar from them. So if we come get our harvesting equipment, show up at the fields, get ready or in the orchards to go do our first day of harvesting, and we see all the apples on the ground and we go, oh, well, I'm just going to pick all these up first. Before you know it, it's the end of the day. You've gotten all those rotten apples up for 10 cents on the dollar. It's time to go home. You come back the next day. What happens? A whole bunch more of those prime apples that were on the tree that you could have harvested yesterday are now laying on the ground again. And we just end up spending too much time focusing on the stuff that's not really as valuable or meaningful to us. So taking that time to map out our week using this method that I'm going to teach you right now is a really effective way for us to avoid just kind of reacting to whatever it is that's happening instead of making for ourselves what we want to see happening. Okay. So here's another good time to get your pen and paper out if you have it. And if you guys go to my website at jillfarmer.com, there's a printout. All that we're talking about here, I've got a printout that you can just have for free. If you just sign your name at the bottom of it, of my website, it'll send the email out to you. Okay. So the first step that I really suggest that you guys do every week on whatever time you set aside. By the way, this takes about 10 to 15 minutes max. Some weeks it only takes me about 5 minutes to map out your week and decide what you want to produce, what you want to feel, what you want to create, what you want to experience for the week. The first thing is called a brain dump, and that's just taking a plain old piece of paper and looking at your calendar and writing down all the things that you think would be meaningful or feel good for you to work on, experience, accomplish, achieve by the end of the week. You're not editing it. You're not putting it anywhere yet. You're just making the massive list. Now, some of you were like, haha, Jill, I already do that every week. I use my list. I have my list. There's my list. The problem with leaving all of those ideas and tasks and things that you want to get done on the list is there's no prioritization. They're not put in actionable places. So a lot of times the list just keeps growing so that at the end of every day we look at our list and we're like, oh, gee, I'm inadequate. I'm never going to get all this done. And it kind of becomes an agent of self-abuse. So I like the brain dump. The list, as we write it down, is the first step, but it's not the last step. The next thing we do is we edit the list. And we go through and we say, oh, here's stuff on this list that I need to get done sometime in the next 3 months, but not this week. So I'm going to put that on my calendar for 2 weeks from now or for a month from now. I'm glad I remembered it. I want to get to it later. There's a safe place for it now on my calendar, but I'm not going to leave this on my to-do list because it's not going to be actionable here. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at stuff and say, is this stuff that matters to me? Is this stuff that's meaningful to me? If this stuff is just stuff that I've always done or that somebody else wants me to do that I don't really want to do, I'm going to take some agency and self-responsibility and I'm going to cross that off my list. And I'm going to focus on things that matter to me more. And then the next thing I'm going to do after I've edited my list and I have a nice edited list of things that matter to me that I'd like to achieve in the next week, and I'm going to time block it onto my calendar because we know when we put stuff on our calendar, we're more likely to do it than if we just have it on a massive list. So if I have exercise buried somewhere on my to-do list versus having it on my calendar at 7:30 tomorrow morning, I'm much more likely to do it. And so I'll give you an example of what kind of a typical calendar might look for me. I use the calendar iCal on my computer. A lot of you might prefer to use a paper planner still, or a paper calendar, or Google Calendar. I have no preference, whichever method feels good to you. The most important thing is that you take those things from the to-do list and you put them in achievable blocks or time blocks. Now you'll notice I don't have any 6-hour or 4-hour time blocks because the brain research shows us that when we put things into it, like all morning long, do taxes, we're going to procrastinate that. And a lot of times we end up doing anything else but taxes. But if I put in 20 to 50 minute blocks on my calendar, specific tasks related to taxes, sort receipts from 9 to 9:45, the fill out W-9s from whatever to whatever. I'm showing my colors here. I'm not an accountant, so I'm just making up terminology, but whatever the task that you have, if you break it down into actionable chunks, and Lynn, you'll notice there's a lot of white space on my calendar. Even though this is a day where I was trying to get some important stuff done, I left a lot of white space in the calendar because we need that white space in our calendar because life happens. There's traffic, interruptions, somebody calls, burn something on the stove. So we don't want to have our days scheduled so tight with experiences or meetings or stuff to do that we don't have any space between it. Now, that doesn't mean that in the white spots on my calendar that it's all downtime. Some of it's downtime because I believe strongly in downtime. Our brains only have so much glycogen or the juice that they run on to run before they start to slow down. And so we have to take breaks, kind of like changing the channel to give our brain a little bit of a break. So I then like to take all the rest of the things that are on my brain dump list that didn't make it onto my calendar, and I make daily to-do lists. I do mine in the reminders section of my iPhone because iPhone reminders are really good places to make a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. My best friend who likes to use this system does not like, as she says, I'm not computery. So she takes a piece of paper and writes Monday on this paper and Tuesday on this paper. And so she uses the same system, but just uses handwritten notes so that we take the stuff off the massive brain dump list and we put it in our calendar or onto daily to-do lists so that when we have that space on our calendar, right? We have the space, the open spots that you see in the calendar that it's not as important of stuff that needs to be on my calendar and time block areas. But now I have a place when I have 15 minutes, it's like, oh, I'm going to look at my daily to-do list. Oh yeah, I've got a birthday gift I want to order online. I want to call regarding another order. I'm going to get some stamps for some work stuff. And then I'm going to follow up with one of my clients. Excuse me, guys. And so I have this nice organized place to go of a list in order to accomplish it. And if I don't get to my Monday list, then it either goes to my Tuesday calendar on my Tuesday list, and it just gives me a nice, structured, easy way for me to have a plan of managing what I want to get to, what can feel big to me. So checking, I don't see any new questions here. So I'm going to share a couple more on the time management side of things. Now, sometimes we have big stuff that feels overwhelming. So it might be cleaning out your garage. It might be cleaning out your whole house because you want to think about having the ability to be flexible and move someday. It could be, again, doing something like taxes or sorting paperwork. And it feels so overwhelming that we just put it off. And I like to use this technique that I learned from one of my mentors who I trained with called a turtle step flow chart. And I've done it on the computer, but you can just do this with a regular old piece of paper like this. Here, I'll get a plain one. And you can just write it out. But all a turtle step flow chart is taking something that feels overwhelming to us and breaking it down into ridiculously easy steps. My mentor calls them turtle steps because if you think about the way a turtle moves, it moves in ridiculously short little steps because it has ridiculously short little legs in relation to the rest of its body. And so it moves in very little steps. And when something is feeling overwhelming and we're procrastinating, it's because it feels big. We actually perceive it as a threat, right? So when we can break it down into ridiculously easy steps, it doesn't feel so threatening. So I was working with an executive director of a large not-for-profit, national not-for-profit, and they were moving offices. And this particular director, I'll say her, Jan, was really feeling paralyzed because there was a lot to do. They were moving buildings and technology shifts. And she said, I should have been getting ready for this physical move for months, and it's in 2 weeks and I'm not ready. And I said, okay, let's map this out into a series of ridiculously easy steps together. And so this is the process that we use to do that. I said, what's a ridiculously easy first step that you can make? And she said, well, I need to sort all the boxes. And I said, does that feel ridiculously easy? And she said, well, no. And I said, how long have you been procrastinating that step? And she said, I don't know, 6 months. So that's not a ridiculously easy first step. If you've been procrastinating it for that long. I said, what's a ridiculously easy first step? And she said, well, I need to call the maintenance guys and actually schedule what day they're going to come physically move stuff. I said, do you know the number? Oh yeah, I just have to push this button. I know. So that was a ridiculously easy first step. Then she said, okay, well, then I still have to sort all this stuff. I need to go through records. I need to look through some boxes of archived stuff that I have. All this stuff has been piled up in my huge office and I can't move into the new space. So I said, okay, how long? She goes, I just need to sort for like 6 hours. And I said, great. You've been saying that for 6 months and nothing's happened. How about if we break it down and we make boxes and you just set up, we create little action boxes of sorting for 15 minutes at a time. And she said, oh yeah, I can do that. That's ridiculously easy. I said, yep, that's a turtle step. It feels ridiculously easy. So that's what she did. She set it up. We set it up on our flow chart. We mapped it out. She's going to sort 15 minutes at a time. And we made about 12 of those boxes. Then she said, after I get stuff sorted, then I need to call the tech people and arrange the tech for changing over my computer. And then I need to box stuff up. And that feels kind of exhausting. So after I sort the stuff, then I'll rebox it to move in 10-minute increments. I said, great. And then we'll transport it. So this was our little, I'm not kidding you guys. It took us about 3 minutes to just map this out. And this is something she'd been procrastinating for months. She called me about a week later and she was laughing and she said, you're not going to believe it. She said, you know how stressed out I was and how busy I was and I didn't have time to do this project. She said, once I could see it mapped out using that little simple flowchart method, and we didn't do it on the computer. I used this for purposes to show you guys. We just did it with pen and paper and mapped it all out on a piece of paper. And she said, I was finding 15 minutes here and there. It took me far less time than I thought to get all this sorted. I sorted everything. And then I called the maintenance people and they boxed everything up. I didn't even have to spend any time boxing it up once I got it sorted. The whole thing was much easier than I thought. I just had to get through the mental roadblock of that big obstacle of actually doing it. And that's why I really like using that technique for breaking things down into ridiculously easy steps. Okay, a couple more thoughts. And again, feel free to add any questions or comments for some best practices to help us be meaningfully productive in time management. It's really tempting when we are doing stuff to think that if it's going to make it easier if we distract ourselves. Turns out our brains are just really much better when we let them focus on one thing at a time. I know, and that means also taking breaks. Sometimes we think, okay, I'm finally going to get this thing done. And then we want to power through and put all this pressure on ourselves. Our brains work well when we take intentional breaks. When I'm trying to improve my productivity to get something that matters to me done, I use timers. And I set a timer for 45 minutes and I turn off all my distractions like, the alert on my text or anything else that's going to distract me. And I know that after 45 minutes of that focused time, that uninterrupted time of doing what matters to me, then I get to take a break. And then I set a timer for 15 minutes for me to take my break, because otherwise sometimes my breaks will last a really long time. But if I give myself a nice little container of 15 minutes, I walk around, I get myself a physical exertion, I let my brain change channels, which allows it to recharge. And then the last thing I want to say is we have this weird thing in our culture where we talk about multitasking as if it's a good thing. We'll say, oh, I'm a great multitasker. And it turns out that, and then people wonder why they have trouble getting stuff done. The brain science is absolutely crystal clear on this. No one can multitask. The brain can do one thing at a time. So when we're trying to do a bunch of things at a time, the brain is actually switching channels back and forth and back and forth. And so it lowers our functionality when we do that. It makes us stupider. There was one research study in England that showed us that people who are multitasking 2 or 3 or more things at a time have the same mental deficit as somebody who's smoking pot. So literally, when you're trying to multitask, it's like you're trying to operate under the influence. It's not helpful. Yet we think somehow we're doing it better. Other productivity research has shown us that when people try to do 2 or 3 things at a time, it takes them 3 or 4 times longer. So instead of if they would have just done each of those things individually. So I'm a big fan of avoiding multitasking. Judy, I have packed so much information into this time. I want to say if anybody has a last question before I let you guys have your time back, but meanwhile, I'm going to turn it over to Susan and to you with great gratitude for letting me share these ideas and great gratitude for what a terrific turnout we had. Thank you so much, all of you, for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. It was really great. And if anyone has any questions, you could raise your hand. You can chat or Steve or Dick, do you have a question?
I have a question.
Steve, okay.
Oh, go ahead.
He's trying to unmute himself. I'm sorry. All right, just go ahead.
I think I'm unmuted now.
There you go, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. We go back a few years, Jill.
Yeah, hi, Steve. That's right. Steve was a great volunteer of ours at Channel 2 when I did Contact 2 a long time ago.
Yeah, in fact, Mike Colombo has called me. Since COVID, we haven't been able to go there. He's called me and he wants me to start doing it at home. But anyway, I told you about my daughter, and she's bringing an impact lab to St. Louis to deal with a lot of these things that you're talking about. It's a new concept of how to help people, especially with unconscious bias, and how to deal with it. And that's what causes a lot of problems in our society, and how to speak to each other with empathy and respect. And so she's in the process of bringing this to St. Louis now. And I'm just wondering, maybe a lot of these problems that you're talking about, when people are able to go through this impact lab and go through this, it'll teach a lot of people how to take care of a lot of these stressful problems that we run across every day.
Absolutely. You make sure that offline you reach out to me. Judy or Susan can tell you how to get in contact so that I can be in contact with your daughter and learn more about this as she's setting it up. And thank you for being here today. It was good to see you.
Nice to see you, Jill.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
What you were talking about, reframing things. Do you have any tips for how to do that as far as, I mean, like if you see a bear in the woods, you know, someone might say, oh, what an exciting thing, and want to take a picture, and somebody else might be scared to death and want to run away. So it's how you look at things, but maybe the bear is a threat, maybe the bear is not. So that's I guess my question is, how do you know when something really is something you should be concerned about and when you should be reframing it in a different way?
Yeah. And I think, you know, don't get me wrong. My attempt is never to try to minimize actual threats or to minimize things that need addressing, things that need, you know, our collective addressing because it's injustice or something that's not right or something that isn't there, is happening to us individually. The attempt is never to be dismissive and say, oh, just move on or be positive or ignore it. It's noticing, I think, if this threat, if we can kind of calm ourselves down, a lot of times people in the midst of very terrifying situations like firefighters, the first thing they learn to do is to try to calm themselves down because they make much better decisions about the real threat that's there when they're not in that activated state. So if you can calm yourself down enough to pause your reaction, you're going to do a lot better job of assessing your actual threat, right? There's a very famous story of firefighters in wildfires, similar to what we've seen in the Western United States this year. And this team of firefighters and they said, we got to run up that cliff. And the head firefighter said, no, will get trapped by the fire. And he said they could see the fire coming down. He said, we all need to burn mini fires where we are, and that'll create a break and the fire will go around us. And he only got 1 or 2 of the people on his team to do that with him. Everybody else ran for the cliff because they didn't want to think. They just wanted to get out and run away from the risk. And instead of pausing to assess what was really happening, they ended up taking themselves in a very not good situation. So I think the simplest way to answer your question is we have to be willing to pause and be honest with ourselves about whether we're actually at risk. And sometimes a trusted thinking partner, an outside person who tends to not minimize, but not over to say, can you help me think through this? Am I overreacting to this? Is there a risk here? And if so, what are some ways I can do to think about strategizing? And, or do I need to reframe it because I'm stuck in reactionary thinking? Is that helpful to you?
Very.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I don't see any more questions. There's no more in the chat. Anyone else? Jill, I think we're have a quiet audience.
Well, it was great. Those are perfect questions. And I had lots of information that I know based on some of my pre-conversations with those of you who came that I wanted to share based on what you wanted to see. So thank you for your attention, for letting me give you, and again, if you go to I'll put it in the chat. If you go to my website, which is jillfarmer.com, there's jillfarmercoaching.com. There is an idea section that has articles in case you want to read about any of this stuff. And feel free to join my newsletter list if you want to get some more information on that, on the things that we talked about with the advanced planning. But otherwise, blessings to all of you in this strange and interesting holiday time that we're entering. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And thanks to everybody at Muirwoods and Covenant House for inviting me. It was an honor to be here.
Oh, it was an honor to have you. Thank you so very, very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.